Welcome to Pathways to Greatness, where we explore the journeys of exceptional individuals who have achieved remarkable success in their fields. Whether you're an aspiring athlete, a business leader, or simply someone striving to reach your full potential, this podcast is your guide to unlocking the greatness within you. Join us as we dive into inspiring stories, practical strategies, and the mindset shifts that can transform your path to greatness. Let's embark on this journey together. Unleash your potential with Conquered Consulting. Are you a student athlete striving for greatness? Do you want to enhance your mental performance and elevate your game? At Conquered, we specialize in mental performance and success coaching tailored for student athletes, parents, and coaches. Our expert coaches provide personalized strategies to boost confidence, improve focus, and achieve your goals both on and off the field. Don't just play the game, conquer it. Visit conqueredconsulting.com and schedule your free consultation today. Take the first step towards success. Hey, and welcome to the Pathways to Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Forrester. And on today's show, Coach Jeff Huebner, the head volleyball coach from Palm Beach Atlantic, joins me and having a conversation that without a doubt is one of the top conversations that I've had so far in he's 112. I think, episode 111, 112. And you're going to want to listen to this one several times just because of the way he makes you think differently about certain things. And I'm not going to go over everything that we talked about here because I want to make sure that you pay attention to it there. And we get into it like right from the very beginning of some just solid wisdom that he shares from his experience, just like we all have experiences. And two of the things that I just want to draw your attention to that you can expect out of the episode is one is to know the importance of having overlapping values with other people, but not overlapping thought processes. So let that sink in a little bit. So have overlapping values, but not overlapping thought processes. And then the other thing that I challenge you with even at the end of the episode, so wait for it, is around positive gossip. These are two areas that had an impact on me in this episode, and I hope that it has an impact on you as well. And so that's why I encourage you to listen to it a couple times. I don't ask often to share this with someone else, but I encourage you to share this with other people, with parents, with leaders in the workplace. If your child has a coach and they play youth athletics, share this with them because this is the kind of stuff that changes the world. And it's a great episode. Coach, thank you so much for being a part of this and sharing this information with me. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Coach Jeff Huebner. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Pathways to Greatness podcast. And today I have Coach Jeff Huebner, the head volleyball coach from Palm Beach Atlantic. So, Coach, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We've had a couple of conversations just up into this, so he has a little bit of an idea of what to expect. And so I did tell him about the fun game that we have that I start every episode with, and that's Would You Rather. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Would you rather go forward 100 years or go back 100 years?
Great question. I think forward. Just have a lot of personal questions about what this looks like, but also, I know Jesus didn't come back 100 years ago, so there's a shot. There's a shot, right? That I have a better chance to see it in 100.
Yeah. So you're telling me there's a chance?
Yeah, yes, a classic Dumb and Dumber. Yep.
Yeah, we know it's going to be, and it's always an interesting question because you'll have different perspectives of the forward and the backwards of why and what it could mean. And so if you go forward 100 years, how long would you like to stay there?
Oh, I just think like 10 minutes, like I need like whatever the next version of TikTok is. There's probably somebody who can like do like a 20-minute recap of what's happened in the last 100 years. And I could watch it on 2X, right? And just long press it. And then that way I can have a sense of what it is. But I would want to have like a okay, this is what we got to get to. These are the potential things that we've got to fix and stuff like that. And so that would help me game plan for the whole thing.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. I like it. All right. So the next one is, would you rather always know the right answer or always make the right decision?
Oh, that's an easy one. The second one. Um, I think the transformational leadership happens at the point of humility. So always knowing the right answer would be really difficult to then also operate in humility. And I think like the collaboration with different people, diversity of thought, diversity of experience, those things help make the right decision. And if you can't include people, then as a coach, I could see that as an individual, but as a coach, man, that'd be tough. And we got a family of 6 too. So if I just was always right, that's still, no matter how right I was, I don't think it would help my 11-year-old son think that I was right.
Never.
We would need to work together on it for sure.
Yeah. And I like the way you phrased it, of where knowing the right answer eliminates humility, and it would be very difficult to stay humble with that. So on that line, how does someone like in your position or a dad leading their home, how do you approach humility when there are big decisions being made?
Well, I think you got to start with questions first. And you got to surround yourself with people who have overlapping values, but do not have overlapping thought processes. So something that I think is really cool about my associate head coach, Lou, is because she grew up in Brazil. We have so many overlapping values, but we have almost no overlapping thought processes. So I'll be thinking about something. I'll be like, I got to get this person or this player, whatever, to achieve this goal. And whether that's a volleyball goal or a process goal or a character goal, or even something really simple like just turning in their homework sometimes can be, part of the job. So I'll have an idea of what the answer needs to look like, and she'll have an idea of what the answer needs to look like, but our process to getting there is super different. And so, as I'm trying to like think about my family and I'm trying to think about our team and our program, I always think about like as many different opinions as I can get. That helps me really, at least, even if I end up going with my original idea, I can at least anticipate what the qualms will be, right? And so that means that like going into it, I can highlight like if you're super type A and you need to know the X and the Y and the Z, and then also like how it all came together, I can anticipate that need if I talk to somebody who's like that ahead of time. Whereas like if I just go with my answer without consulting, then that's when it can get a little dicey. So that's kind of how we structure our team. And then also my wife and I are really, really similar and super, super different thought process. So we have some like base rules, but also there's like people who are better at things. And so we try to lean into our strengths and fill in and cover up when we're able to. But I think it's really just about like, you already know your opinion. So let's find out what the other opinions are. So that way you can make the most educated leadership choices as you can.
Yeah, and there's a ton there to unpack. So I want to hang out here for a second because I like the way you framed everything up about having overlapping values. And on the show, I've always talked about how important it is to know your values and to have that line in the sand, that flag, the hill that you're going to die on, and that's your values. How do you help people when you're talking to student athletes or you're looking to hire a new coach? How do you help them understand what their values are? Because so many people have a quote unquote good idea of what their values are, but they don't know what are those hard and fast values that they live by.
Oh, it's a great question. So we operate with what we talk about are like our 3 core values, right? And so you need to know them, you need to be intentional about them, and then you also need to like pre-decide a lot of things. So as a coaching staff, when I'm hiring, we always hire, and before we do the process, even like the core, what are your 3 core values? that's like part of the process. And I do think like it's become very, very cliche to like have a coaching philosophy, which I think it's great to have a coaching philosophy, but I almost feel like it's too easy to give the right answer, right? In that, and it's not as like, it's not specific enough. And so for me, like my core values are patient, everyday excellence, and additive, right? And so like I want to be thoughtful about my approach to things. I want to make sure I'm excellent in the little things. That's what everyday excellence is. It's got to be critical thinking toward things that other people take for granted. And then being additive is like, I want because I'm part of it, whatever it is, it could be I'm in the convention center recruiting, because I'm there, it's better for people. Because I showed up at the basketball game, it's better for people. Because I showed up at the staff meeting, it's better for people. I want to be additive in everything that we do. And so I wear my core values, and then I ask the athletes to come up with theirs. And we do it like we re-ask them basically once a quarter. So business terms, right? So, and then I dig in with them, and we have team vision meetings on Fridays. And so one of the things that we'll do is like, we'll sit there and be like, all right, Addison, what are your core values? And she'll tell us her core values. And then we'll try to come up with situations as a group. Like, okay, how does that affect your finances? How does it affect your decision to go to the beach? How does it affect your, like, and just not trying to undercut, but to prepare. Right. And so I always feel like the path to success as an athlete is how you manage things that didn't go the way you thought they would go. Right. And so when you are locked into your core values, you've basically pre-decided how you're going to behave in hard situations. And when that's done for you, then you can execute. And like, that's the second piece to it. So that's kind of how we set our athletes up for it. And we revisit it, and we talk about it all the time, and it's in their binders. And, for the most part, the first time we do it, especially with the freshmen, there's like, 6 freshmen, 5 freshmen, they have like the same 4 words because they talk together. And then by sophomore year, everybody's very different, because they realize like, oh, this is going to be something that like gets sharpened and filed down, and, hopefully gets through the fire through. So.
Oh, you're speaking my language, because one is you live it. So it's not just, hey, here are 3 cool words we're going to write on the whiteboard and we'll talk about it next year. It's actually putting it in action. And I want the audience to hear that is you have to live it. You have to practice it. You have to, like you said, make important decisions based on those values. So it's constantly reiterated and you reminding yourself in your life. And the other thing that I like that I want people to hear is what you said about values can change, and they actually should change with maturity and wisdom as you face certain things and you understand life a little bit better. My values at 52 are different than they were at 30. And I'm glad, because that means I've had growth.
Yeah. And for me, like, I feel so lucky because my boss actually, at my very first one-on-one with her, she was like, all right, so these are my 3 words. What are your 3 words? And she didn't prep me for it. And she was like, you don't have to have the answers right now. But like, that was one of those situations where we grew up very different. We have completely different roles, but we have overlapping values. And so it was a thing where like we sort of just like reveled in it, because it wasn't a conversation we had already. We'd already been working together for 4 months, just with the busyness of fall. And it was like, oh, this is something that you've already been thinking about. This is something that you're already going to lead me through. And then now you have accountability in those things, because like as a human, I'm sure that there are times where I show up to things and I'm not as patient as I should be, or I show up to things and I'm not as additive as I want to be. And the best thing that I can have in the body is like somebody to like raise their hand and be like, hey, you missed your opportunity. Not that you're a bad person, but you missed your chance to even further affect and impact people, because there was this moment where you just sat there instead of taking leadership responsibility or whatever it might be. So it was really fun and really cool for me to have basically walked into a situation where I was going to get to be encouraged in that way.
Yeah. And it shows the example of if you find a good leader, they can change you and impact you. And then it just continues to trickle down to all those people that you're surrounded by. So kudos to her for doing that and challenging you on that. The other part is not overlapping thought processes. I love it. And my wife and I are exactly the same in the sense that we have overlapping values, but completely different thought processes that at times frustrate both of us because we forget. So that was going to be the question that I'd love to get your insight on is how do we as people, when you have opposing thought processes, not fight against those and feel like it's an argument versus it's challenging us to think differently and that may come up with different solutions or challenges that we didn't anticipate because our thought process is different than theirs.
Yeah. So I think your question is like asking, what do we do with our assumptions? Right. So like, one of the things that I always tell people, whether it's recruits or whether it's potential employers or whether it's potential employees, or even if it's just coworkers, like, the most important assumption you can make is that the people around you are trying their best. And I think that I think we mess that up in sports all the time, literally all the time. Like if you think that somebody hit the ball out of bounds on purpose and you're like, what are you doing? Like that's like a very common coaching question, right? And the question itself is like almost right. It's why did you do that? Like, did you see that this happened or this happened? And like, that's an important question. But what are you doing implies that you didn't assume that they were trying to do the right thing, right? And so when you're trying to create an environment that encourages different and divergent opinions, then you need to assume that like me and my wife are trying to raise just alive, responsible adults, like first alive and then responsible in that order. And when my wife gives me something, I need to like really be thoughtful that like, even if I completely disagree with her, she's not trying to disagree with me because she doesn't like me or because I'm doing something right, but her goal is literally the same as mine. I'm talking with a player when they come into my office and they're like, hey, X, Y, and Z. If I assume that they're trying to take the easy way out, then I'll treat them like their thoughts aren't as valuable as if I say, hey, she's trying to like look out for her teammates or protect the team or respond to adversity or something that's really helpful. I'm assuming the best in her. And therefore, I can at least work to see her opinion. And we do the same thing. We ask this of our athletes. We ask them for like positive gossip. Like you need to practice talking positively about the people you associate with. On a regular basis, we talk about making the same assumption for the coaching staff. Like we can't help what we don't know. So when you have a thing or an issue, just assume that I'm going to handle it well. And then you go ahead and be mad at me if I don't. But like, I can't help you if you don't come talk to me. So, I think that that's just like assuming the best in people is really the most important thing to have differing, diverse experiences coexist with one another. And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't want to be in a culture that way. And that's okay. But you need to make sure you're not in an echo chamber. You need to grow out of that. That's a maturity thing for sure. But I do believe that like the assumptions that we make about people are the most important things that are uncontrollable to the person we're talking with. And so that's a fight that we have in our own gray matter.
Yeah, and that's absolute gold. And just to remind the audience is that what Coach is talking about, it's an intentional decision because we naturally will go the other way. Yes. It's that lizard brain. If you subscribe to that thought process, is that it takes us way back to how to protect ourselves, is to assume everybody is out to get us. When in opposite, like what Coach was saying, is assume the best. They think that they're doing the best, and if they're not, and you see issues, that's where you have a chance to step up and coach and help educate and instruct and ask more questions and go through there. The other thing that you mentioned that I absolutely love, that some people may have missed, is positive gossip. And that's not an easy thing, because as soon as we start to hear negative gossip and negative things, it's easy to jump on that train and pile on, because it's just, again, it's our assumption that people are doing things against us and on purpose and not trying to do their best. Talk a little bit about how you try to instill positive gossip, because that's also an intentional decision to go that way.
Yeah. So one of our team standards is protect the team. And so when we found that, like, when we were talking about it early on, and we asked the athletes just like, hey, tell me an example of protecting the team. And they're always in response to something negative, which is a good thing. Like, if somebody's saying something negative about the volleyball team, you say, hey guys, like, actually X, Y, or Z. Or somebody's saying something negative about your teammate, you say, actually, don't talk about her like that. She's my friend, whatever. It's harder to look for opportunities to do it the other way, but the results of positive gossip end up being so much more meaningful, because the thing about gossip is that it travels, right? And so we were actually talking to a recruit who came to camp, and I was just saying how much I liked this kid, great human, et cetera, et cetera. And then my assistant coach told me the story about her, that, like, she came up and she saw that she was on a court with somebody who was in 8th grade. She was a junior in high school. And she was like, hey, I know X, Y, and Z, make me her partner. Let me be with her all the time. I'll take care of this kid. She's incredibly talented, but I know she needs a buddy. Right. And so the fact that Coach Lou told that to me, I had texted the coach, like the high school coach. I was like, I want to tell you something cool about your player. And then I texted the kid and I was like, hey, I need to tell you a story about you. And obviously that, like, sends anxiety to kids, but, like, it was a really cool moment because, like, we got to see how that positively affected all of the different pieces. And it changes the confidence of the person. When I think that the people around me are talking about me negatively, it makes me anxious. But when I think that the people around me are talking about me positively or finding ways to do so, then it gives me, like, boldness, and it gives me the ability to, like, really lean into who I was created to be in a pretty unique and really, like, you were made to mission-based way that I think you actually, like, you have to train yourself to believe in. And that's one of the things that Coach Lou and I have gotten so intentionally pretty good at about our team. Like, we just really don't sit in the negative about them. We don't sit in the office and talk negatively about our athletes. We always say, like, if we're going to talk negatively about an athlete, we'll just bring him in and tell him. And so that way we don't have that, but we do sit in the office all the time and talk positively about our athletes, not just to each other, but to our administration and to our coworkers and to the FCA people and to the professors. And, like, soon enough, like, the people around here are like, oh yeah, we know the volleyball team, they do the right things. And I think that's, like, it's not manipulative, or it's real. Like, they do the right things, and they shouldn't be, like, ever on eggshells because they don't know how their coach is talking about them.
Yeah. And it's such an powerful, just important culture to develop. And imagine if we had that in the real world, that the news wasn't about showing all the bad things that people do, the smear campaigns, all the negativity, but if it was just positivity. Before long, it doesn't mean that negativity would be completely smashed out, but you would see so much more important things in life, because, like you said, you would expect the most from your neighbor. You would expect the most from this other person. And then we also don't know where they're coming from. What hurt are they bringing into those decisions because they're trying to protect themselves or whatever it may be, based on things that happened in their past. And it's something, when you were talking, I was thinking about how important it is to do all of what you said with ourselves, and looking at the gratitude, looking at what did I do well today? Because it's so easy and quick to talk about what we did bad, and then you just keep piling on what I did bad. Again, doesn't mean that you should ignore that, because the weaknesses that we have in our life is what holds us back. However, you've got to give yourself some credit and some grace and celebrate some of the things that you've done well.
Yeah, all parts equal. And I think that like a lot of the things that we do with athletes, because developing confidence is, I think, the most critical and most difficult part of the job. And a lot of times when we're trying to help somebody see themselves a little bit more clearly, or how that they were knitted together to be incredible, we ask them to like, we say their own problems back to them as if they were giving me advice. Like, so this is happening, what would you tell somebody who's doing this stuff? And then they would be like, you got to have some personal grace. You got to love on yourself. You got to like see the good in all the things. And then I just like write it down and I just read it back to them. And they're like, oh, and it doesn't mean that they like can instantly just like go from, I'm frustrated with myself to I love myself, unconditionally. But I do think that like those, like if you want to be that hard on yourself, you have to be that thrilled for yourself. And that's okay. Like both of those things are healthy, and both of those things. And I think, honestly, I think that like cultural Christianity is dangerous because we like overvalue humility in a way that doesn't point at the greatness of how we were created. And that's not a Jeff accomplishment, but it is a Jeff failure if I don't lean into the good things about me that I was created to do. And so like, that's something that we talk about like pretty regularly. We need to acknowledge our faults and sin, and we need to acknowledge our greatness in creation. And like those things together point us toward the character of the creator. And so like that challenge is really hard. And it's not something that like somebody's just going to be like, oh yeah, awesome, got it. But I do really think that like finding that balance is really important. And I do think like understanding the purpose of humility, not just the checkbox of humility, is really critical.
When you were sharing that example, I'm actually in my daily Bible reading, I'm in Corinthians, and I think Paul's a great example of giving a heavy dose of both of those things. Like he has no problem telling you where you've done wrong, but a lot of people forget and don't see, because they hear him calling people out, that he also praises them for such like how well that they're doing and what they're doing well. And I applaud you for that. And it's a great example of how you can bring both from a place of love, that he wants you to feel good about yourself, but he also wants you to know where you need to improve. And he, like you said, is if he's going to talk about you, he's bringing you in and sitting you down and telling you eye to eye, which is not an easy thing to do by any means.
Yeah. One thing that Lou says all the time is you say it with your chest, whatever it is, like you say it with your chest. And so, but I do think like as coaches, like we need to be really thoughtful about if we are being hard on a person or player, and we can do it directly without including any type of character judgment, then we are building respect and rapport. And then when we give a compliment, then they know to trust it. And so like, there's a lot of like these coaching rules, right? Like 5 good things to 1 bad thing. And like a lot of these things you're supposed to do. And I find like in my lived experience that like anything that's a checkbox doesn't work. So if I only have 1 compliment, I should not say 5 compliments, because the kids are incredible. This generation is incredible at sniffing out inauthenticity. It's like the one, like they're like, that's like their first language is knowing when somebody's not being genuine. And their second language is whatever they grew up speaking. And like, because they see it all the time, they're like scrolling and they're looking at Instagram or TikTok and they're like, that's fake, that's fake, that's fake, that's fake, that's AI. And so it's kind of the same thing to me. Like you need to pull people in. And if you don't pull them in, you're telling them, when you're not holding them accountable, you're telling them that I don't think you can do it. And that's not authentic. And then you don't love them. And especially if you don't pull them in, you talk to somebody else about it, then you're really like conveying the message of like, I can't help this person. Maybe you can help this person. And so it increases the value of your words when you can say them directly to the people when they're negative and when they're positive. And then it increases the value of your relationship when you talk to the other people about, like, if I'm talking to you about one of my athletes, like if I'm speaking life about her to you, you're just going to walk around with this idea. Not that the kid's perfect, but like, oh, that's a really good human. Like I would want my family, daughter, son, whatever, to like know this person. And then whenever that gets back to her, and it might be in a day or a week or a month or a year, then that's going to mean something significantly more to that person. Even just me ending up on your show right now, I mean, that's from a relationship that I built with Janie from, from her alma mater, which I used to coach at, right? So like, it's just a big sort of loop, and it just takes its time to come back. But when it does, it means significantly more when it's positive gossip that way.
For sure, because people don't forget of how you treated them and how you made them feel. They'll never forget that. And one of the things that when you were talking that I remember somebody else talking about is bad decision doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person, because we all make bad decisions in our lives at some point or another. And it's separating the emotion. And like you were talking about, it's just a fact. It's like, this is the business truth of what transpired. And I'm going to remove this from, like you said, of being your character. Now, if it's becomes habitual and you're not living in alignment to your values, that's when you've got to work on it, but it doesn't make you ultimately a bad person forever. You can change that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Question 3. See, I told you, I just run with the questions.
It's great.
Would you rather have pizza or tacos?
Oh, tacos. Unless, I would like to caveat, unless that it's a pie, which is a Chicago style pizza that's deep dish, then it can be pizza. But I don't trust, I would say, 49 of the 50 states with pizza. So I'm going to go safe with tacos.
So you're just a Chicago guy?
Yeah.
What of all the Chicago brands, what's your famous or your favorite place?
Yeah, Lou Malnati's. I think, I understand anybody who isn't that way, but I don't think that they're right. So, I tell my kids, like, you're entitled to your own opinion. You're just not really entitled to your opinion being right. So like you can think whatever you want to, but Lou's is the place. I grew up with the Malnati family, so I'm a little bit cost bias. We played, my dad played for a softball team sponsored by them. Good people, good kids, and they're everywhere too. And I wish that I could open one here, because I think people are missing out.
Yeah, I have a strong feeling it's going to make its way to Florida. In Orlando, we have a Giordano's. So that was really our first real exposure to Chicago pizza, and we like it. But if you have to balance the two, I would swing towards Lou's as well.
Yeah, it's I won't eat Giordano's. I'm sorry. Or Gino's East or any of it. Like it's maybe it's personal pride, but I don't know. If I'm going to have the pizza, it needs to be a pie, and that's the pie. So,
well, there's sincerity in it. So those of you who are listening to this on Apple or wherever, you can go to YouTube around the 30-minute or so mark, and you can see it on his face that he 100% believes to his core what he's saying.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I'm not sponsored. I don't have an NIL with them yet. I'm working on it. So
yeah, maybe you should.
Yeah, they haven't wanted my name or my likeness or my image yet, but we're working together.
That's all. Are there any down there by you? Anywhere close?
No. I think nothing. Lou's is actually only in the greater Chicagoland area still. Portillo's was the first like Chicago area place to like be willing to go elsewhere once they sold a couple of years, 5, 10 years ago. But still just Lou's in Chicago.
Still up that way. Okay, got it. All right. So the last question is, if you came with a warning label, what would it say?
Interesting. think it would just say unfiltered.
Mm.
Just, I think it's more important to be thoughtful, but to say what you mean to say than to say almost what you mean to say. And I think that like when you say almost what you mean to say, whatever 10% that you left out for the sake of somebody's feelings, where you think you're being kind to them, what you're actually doing is giving them 10% anxiety because they're filling in the blank for you. And so about halfway through working at Texas Women's University, I really just like, I sat down and made the decision that I was just going to be done with like approximates and almosts. And I don't think like, I think sometimes people say this, like, you know, when they say that they say what they mean to say or whatever, they like use it as an excuse to offend people. And I don't want that to be the association. It doesn't mean that I couldn't offend somebody, obviously, because how people receive things is not always how I mean them. And that's my job to like get better at communicating. But I do think that the root of all issue is miscommunication. And so if I'm busy like filtering out some of my problems with individuals or people, I really find that like the fill in the blank isn't always the blank I meant them to fill it. And then it turns into a Mad Lib, and that might be a dated reference for some people, but like, you know, you can say that it's like put in some adjective in there and you can give them the whole sentence. You'd be like, use your context clues, get the right one. But if they choose, you know, any wrong verb or any wrong adjective, like it creates a problem that didn't need to be created if you could just be just a tiny bit more courageous. And I think that people value that. And I think that like when I think about young people, I think that they are incredibly good at handling problems if they know what the problems are. When I think about old people, I think generally we are pretty good at handling problems regardless of whether we know what they are or not yet. But we're pretty locked into whatever we think the right answer is. And so like we're pretty like narrow-minded about like, oh, this is how you do that. And so as I talk to people, I just think like in either circumstance, giving them the whole good, the bad, like directly, especially when it's completely unrelated to character, then I think that that's the most important thing you can do. So I really try to like, I find myself in the last 5 years saying sentences like, you know, I wasn't going to say, but honestly, I need to say like that sentence exists a lot in my vernacular in the last 5 years. And maybe that's even just like a little bit of guarding on my own. So I got to decide if I think that sentence is worth it. But I do think that like, it's really critical to just say what you mean to say, and don't be reckless and don't be stupid and don't be thoughtless. But if you have a thought and opinion that you need to iron out, if you expect it to actually get worked out, you can't work on 75% of it now and 25% of it later. So, and I would say that my last boss at TWU, she used to say all the time, like, you can't confuse hope for a plan. And that's kind of what that is to me. If you're trying to like address 75% of the problem and hope the last 25% come along, that's a fake plan. So,
and what I like about when you were talking about filling, other people will fill in the gaps. The problem with me is the 25% that I'm holding back. I've already predetermined how I think you're going to respond to the 25% that I'm holding back. So because of my fear and my imagination, I'm not going to give it to you. So now I'm imagining how you're going to respond. You're now trying to fill in the gaps of what did Jeff mean by sharing that? And it goes to what you said is it becomes a miscommunication. Right. And, you know, like you talked about before, is if you're genuine and you share the good, the bad, and the ugly on a consistent basis without emotion, people won't take it as personal. You still can't control how they'll receive it, but you can at least be consistent and dependable on what you're sharing. The other two things that I thought of while you were speaking was, one is there's a great book called The Four Agreements. Have you ever read that one?
I have not. No.
It's really good. And one of them is don't take good or bad personal. That we're really quick to take the good news and the praise and attach that to our chest like a Superman S. But anything that's negative, we're not willing to accept. And the book just talks about it on one of the four agreements is don't take either one of those personal. Take it, receive it, acknowledge it, but you can't take one without the other. If you're willing to accept all the good, you got to accept everything else. And I feel like to what you were sharing is if you have that attitude, then you're giving people permission to give you the other 25% because they know you're not going to overreact or just react in a negative way when you hear something that you don't like.
Yeah. And almost always the thing that's the most important part is the part that we don't want to say. Like if we just dealt with the 25%, we'd have a better chance of dealing with the root issue than if we dealt with the easy 75%. Right. And so there's a great book called Do Hard Things. And it's definitely not intentionally for adults. It's written by kids for kids. It's like one of the books that I read with athletes pretty regularly. It's written by these two twins who were the youngest Supreme Court interns in the state of Alabama or Arkansas. So I apologize to whichever state I got incorrect. And the whole point of the book is that young people aren't encouraged to do hard things because they're not given permission to try, in the same way where even if when I grew up, I didn't have permission to try, I didn't have supervision either to be told don't try. And so I think that that's kind of like what you're talking about. It's like we need permission and we need agency and we need advocacy in order to do the hard things on purpose. And then like our brain chemistry literally changes every time we try something new, whether it worked or didn't work. It gives us a set of real learning experiences that's uniquely different than doing the easy things because we don't actually challenge ourselves, stretch our synapses or doing that stuff. So that's something that we kind of just to add on and feed with kind of what you're talking about. That's something we talk about really all the time. It's like, you got to make the hard choice. So,
yeah, it's on Instagram. I follow all these different 80s accounts and there's these pictures of these kids with banana seat bikes jumping homemade ramps in the street.
Sure.
And
so like
we did that. We did that all the time.
Yeah.
But now if I saw my kid doing that, I would flip out. But to your point is you have to allow people to make decisions because it builds resiliency. It builds tough. My wife and I were just talking last night about how it just seems athletes nowadays, I see more torn shoulders, torn knees, torn like all these other things. And you almost wonder, is it because they don't play outside and they fall out of swings and they do these things that builds a stronger, more resilient body to where now it's like they're Ferraris because of how they're being treated and every little thing that goes wrong is pretty dramatic.
Yeah. I think there's probably some truth to that. I think like, I just remember at least one kid in every class always that I was ever in had a broken something, had a cast, right? It was really common to sign somebody's cast like once a month. And, thankfully my kids haven't broken a lot of bones, but their class doesn't have kids with injuries. And it's just, it's just kind of what it is with like, and it's not the athlete's fault. Specialization is really hard right now, but like being a multi-sport athlete is really critical to build athletic resilience and, body toughness and stuff like that. But also, it's like sports are the most researched thing in American culture in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to parenting. And like, even if you don't know what to do, you should put your kids in sports. And so, I think that's like the Ferrari analogy is really good. It's really, really good. And the question is like, are those supposed to be daily drivers? You know, and there are some people who should have a Ferrari and some people who should not drive a Ferrari. And instead, everybody's trying to drive the Ferrari. So like, it's the space, but kids, it's not really anything that they're doing or not doing. I think that they would want to jump the bike ramp if you just stayed out of their way sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Just stay inside.
Yeah.
Just close the blinds, stay inside. Because, our parents, they didn't have Life 360, and it's a different world now.
Sure.
Because I'm sure my mom, she's a worrier by nature, and I love her dearly. And I know that she would have loved Life 360 because she loves it now. I'm 52 and I'll still get, hey, I see you're not at home. Where are you? But I love it because that means I know that it comes from a sincere place of that she, and now that I'm a parent, I totally understand and get it. Well, Coach, I know that I want to be very respectful of your time, and I want to get to some of the important questions that I know we talked about before. Is to give you a little bit of a snapshot, and any new listeners, is why I created Pathways to Greatness as a podcast, because I wanted to bring people on like yourself to share tactical wisdom like you already have, in showing that there's no right or wrong way to do certain things. It's just your way. And then ultimately that everybody has a different definition of greatness. And then also that pathways are never linear. It's a point A and point B. Nobody's ever said it was a straight line. It's ups and downs and swiggles and switchbacks and just a lot of craziness, that you need the things that you've already shared to help us get through all that. Because ultimately, I just don't want people to quit. I want them to persevere. I want them to build resilience. That's our word of the episode today, I think. And then that they can just keep moving forward. So with all that being said, what would you say your definition of greatness is?
So I've thought about this a lot in my life, and there's I don't know if you've read the book Uncommon by Tony Dungy, but it's just a great one. And so my answer is going to be swayed by the book in its entirety. Greatness to me is the ability for an individual to persevere through what somebody else is unwilling to persevere through. The boringness of greatness is the least talked about piece. It's the show up. It's just the show up. And like, when you read books about Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan or these like killers, when it came to things, like we marvel at the stories that are like funny and like a little bit gaudy, right? And you're just like, I can't believe that he would say that, even, you know? But the way that the greatest greats talk about people who are ahead of them is in disbelief. Kevin Garnett is like one of the like largely accepted most competitive human beings that anybody's ever, you know, coached or played against, right? And like, he's famous for the anything is possible meme, right? And like, he tells the story about Kobe Bryant, who like, you know, when they were playing on the USA team together, you know, going out till like 3:00 in the morning because Kobe knew it was important to connect with his teammates, but then also being in the elevator at 5:00 in the morning on his way down to go work out. And like, Kevin Garnett, one of the greatest competitors of all time, looks at that and is like marveled by basically the insanity of it, but the simplicity of it, right? And like, that's to me what greatness is, a measure of like people who can't, if people can't understand your perseverance, then you're probably onto something. And because that's like, to them, that's where like they live not on that level, right? And I think that there's levels to all of this stuff, and there's balance that's important, and you have to know all of these different spaces. But like, when people can't understand your perseverance, that's when you're really flirting with something great. And so, because again, like, being perfect is never the measure of greatness. It's never the story of Michael Jordan. Like, he, he was 17 for 17, whatever. Like, that's never the story. It's always the willingness to try, right? So that's, I think, where I would land on what I believe greatness is like keyed into.
Yeah, and it's a very good definition, because one of the things that I heard I think it was this week, is that it may be simple, but it's not easy.
Right.
And perseverance isn't complicated. It's a pretty simple approach to just have perseverance and just keep trying and be consistent. But that is one of the hardest things to do, is to persevere. And that's it. I heard another thing, I think it was Mel Robbins was talking about, is that, or it was a coach's wife actually. And she was talking about how he coached, and what they focused on is be good at the things that don't require any talent. And that's hard work. That's, focus. It's being nice to people. It's having gratitude. It's all these things that don't require that innate God-given ability to be able to shoot a basketball, hit a volleyball super hard, hit a baseball, throw a football, whatever it may be. There's things that require talent, but how many less talented people end up being the most successful because they have perseverance, they have the drive and the focus? There's probably people on this planet that were more talented than Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant when it comes to basketball, but very few would ever measure their perseverance and their dedication to doing the simple things well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also being honest with yourself about what you want your resilience to look like, right? Like, there's probably some people who are more talented at basketball who, to them, their life goals weren't basketball. So I'm going to use Chase Budinger as an example. Chase was the number one male volleyball recruit in the country coming out of high school. And he could have gone to any volleyball school. He was like the next Karch Karai. And decided to go play basketball at Arizona because he wanted to take care of his family. So he played professional basketball for 10 years in the NBA. Then retired from the NBA with a good chunk of change and played professional volleyball, made the Olympics, probably never had the career in either sports that he could have had. But for him, he wanted to be really family focused, and he wanted to be around. He wanted to be able to take care of his family for generations. And so that was his goals. And so, like, I also think sometimes we get caught up in like evaluating somebody's career sometimes without talking to them about what their core values are, and judging them according to like what they should want because of their talent, without understanding who they are, especially in athletics, right? And so I think that that's like one of the good, important things for us to recognize as coaches, just that like you can't judge a human without knowing the human, because if the student athlete comes in and they tell you like, hey, I'm here for the balance, and then you're mad at them when they're not balanced, that's a you problem, not a them problem. And if you never ask the question, that's still a you problem. But then there are some kids who come in, they tell you they want to be all conference, they want to be all American. You should check with them first. Be like, do you really? Let me tell you what it takes. But then you go ahead and hold them accountable to it, because that's what they want. And so I think like pushing people to really understand their words and not just say the right words. We really talk about like a lot. And I say this to my boss, like, I am super not interested in being right. I'm very interested in getting it right. And so I tell the same thing to my athletes. Like, do not tell me what you think the right thing is. Tell me what is right to you. And then we can always work from there. That's totally fine. Those things may have like consequences, or we need to negotiate through like, what does that mean for us as a group? But it's always way easier to solve in that space.
That's so well said. And I'm happy that you brought it full circle back to the core values, because I was thinking when you were talking about that example of his core values, one of them is probably family. And that, above all, is how he makes his decisions. Mm-hmm. And you also stated a really valuable part is don't judge people until you talk to them to find out what their values and their motives are. Because now that that family is a number one value for him, all of his decisions make sense. He's still got to play volleyball at a high level. He's still got to play basketball at a high level, and he's fine. He can put his head on the pillow.
He did exactly what he wanted to do, and we should all learn from that. And we don't have to want what he wants, but we all should learn to know what we want for sure.
So before we end, because you sparked my interest with that one, how do we know what we want? Like if you're having that conversation with an athlete that may say, I want to be a all conference player or whatever it may be, how do you help them decide, is that really what they want to do? Or is that just kind of what they're talking about?
It's great. Like if I had a real answer, then I think I would, I think I could probably write a book on it and retire. I think the actual most frustrating part is that the actual answer is trial and error. And a lot of times we let people try, but we don't let them err. And then they become risk adverse to the trial. And as people who are interested in growth, as people who are interested in maturity, one of the things that I love, and I'm just going to tangent for a second, but like my favorite Greek word is the word for perfection, because it means complete and it means maturity also. And I think that's the one that's used to describe Jesus. It doesn't mean that he wasn't perfect, but as we are striving to be like him, we're seeking maturity and we're seeking completion. And I think that like, in order to do those things, we have to be permitted to try things and fail and then try again. Otherwise, we can't build the resilience, the perseverance, which I think has become the theme of the hour. But like, what we try to do with our athletes is we try to ask them these questions. We ask them lots of questions all the time, and we try to challenge their thinking all the time. And then we try to let them make a spirited, intentional effort to whatever the thing is. And then sometimes they can't. And so I talk a lot of times in like days, right? Like I have a player right now who is really trying to learn how to topspin jump serve. And so she's really not good at it, but she's going to be good at it if she's willing to keep trying. And so I talk to her all the time, like, hey, that's pretty close. Like you're probably 14 days away. Like that's like, and it gives her the comfort to like keep it on. Like she probably has made one serve every 6 or so. And like, it's not going great, but it will if she's just willing to keep working on it. And so, when a player comes in is like, hey, Jeff, I want to be an All-American. I'm like, awesome. Okay, give me 14 days of work that looks like this and let's reconvene. And like, this is what you need to do. You need to put in the extra this work. You need to get extra weight room. You need to really dial in your nutrition. You need to be thoughtful about your extra reps. You need to take care of your body in this way. And this is the prescription for whatever that means. Try it for 14 days and then decide like, oh, I could do that. Or like, oh, actually, I see X, Y, or Z. But then in the future, if you tell me like, I don't understand X, then you won't have that feeling that you don't have the personal experience of what it takes, right? And so like most people can do anything for 2 weeks. And then that's a fair amount of time, I think, for people to like trial and error. And then the key from me is like making sure that I keep my judgment out of it, which I think is hard. Like I think that's like very difficult as a coach, because you want everybody to want to be an All-American, but you also have to be reasonable about what everybody's role is, right? And like role acceptance is probably the most important function of team success. And so helping them find that is to be the goal. And sometimes you want it for the other person more than they want it for themselves. But if you find their role acceptance, it goes both ways. It's not just the coach's job to make the players accept the role. It's the coach's job to accept the role that the player wants for themselves in some circumstances. If it's not, play professional volleyball after college, which means X, Y, and Z. So just like giving the opportunity to try and error, not trial, error, and then done. and then quit on the kid. So that's, I think, hopefully a staple in our program, where we talk a lot about like making good mistakes and being willing to try new things. And hopefully we example that by trying things as coaches and then like coming back the next day and going, well, that was bad. Like that was on me, man. Like I explained that terrible. Like hopefully we're decent at it. Yeah, it's a place that we always try to get better at, but I do really think that that's the key. And the worst part about the key is that it's not anything that anybody can predict. And so you just have to like go through the process with them.
And I keep saying this because everything that you're sharing is just resonating so strongly with me, that what I want people to pay attention to what you had shared was the fact that somebody's going to ask for something. In many cases, we have to be very descriptive and almost prescriptive of what they need to do to accomplish that. Because especially in sports, somebody may say, well, I want to be an All-American. And most coaches are like, well, then you need to work harder. And then that's where they leave it. And the young person's like, okay, what does that mean? Do I have to try harder at practice and potentially get injured? Do I have to, like, what does that mean? And so many times we don't communicate. And you said earlier in our conversation that miscommunication is usually the issue. And that I would see as a firm miscommunication is if somebody says, I want to be an All-American, and you leave it at, well, work harder. How are they going to understand what they need to do? And if you give them that list and say, here's what you need to do for 2 weeks, we'll come back and figure out if you're on track and where you're missing, because they probably aren't going to be able to do everything that you told them within that 2 weeks. But if you see effort and you see drive and saying, okay, I've done this, and coach, to be honest, I've only done 7 of the 12 things that you laid out, but I'm willing. I'm just trying to figure out the 7 first. Yeah. And it just creates a good open conversation of, you know what, coach, I tried it for 2 weeks. I think I'd be fine at an all conference. What does that look like versus All-American?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's like, it's even just, they do it for 2 weeks and they realize that until they have better habits, they won't be able to achieve what the next thing is. And so a lot of times it's like, I do want this. I can see how this would get me to where I say I want to be. What's a good approach to make sure I don't burn out? That's like, I think the most common response that I get, more than just like, okay, let me back it off. Most of the time, like those kids aren't going to try it at all if they're going to end up backing off anyway. And then we talk about, okay, so like these are the 12 things you need to do. So like these next 2 weeks, we're going to add these 2 habits. And like, we always lift, 3 days a week at 6:30. So like, you're going to always wake up at 6, even on the days that you don't lift, because like, we're going to start to just track these like simple, small habits. And like, we're going to add this habit. We're going to add this habit. Okay, great. 2 weeks from now, how are you doing with these things? Great. If my body leveled out, awesome. Let's add this 3rd habit. Let's add this 4th habit. And I think that that's kind of like, it's hard. I think right now as a coach, as a leader, we're all of us are about process goals. We're always about process goals. Like you need to really focus on the process. And then at the same time in athletics, like sometimes winning is the goal, and it has to be the goal. And like, that's the point of playing the sport in a lot of ways. And for me, like I'm hyper competitive because I want to have a position and a power and a platform that gives me an opportunity to talk about how and why we are doing it this way. And I think that people generally aren't interested in listening to people who lose all the time. And so like, that's why I think that it's important as a Christian to be excellent. And so that's kind of how we structure it. But like our athletes, they almost always are able to do the thing. And as we talk them through it, they need to be really thoughtful about like process goals are really important to a point. And then you have to put the skin in the game. Like at some point you have to make the choice, take the risk and be like, I'm going to allow myself to be disappointed if I don't X, Y, or Z. And I think something that happens as adults, and kind of coming back to like what our natural reaction is, our natural reaction is to like protect ourselves. We don't let ourselves be disappointed very often, which makes our like growth mindset be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 step forward, 1 step back, 2 step. But an athlete who's willing to risk it and be like actually disappointed, if they make it or if they don't make it, they're usually like 5 or 6 steps forward and 1 step back. And they're just doubling and tripling their growth ability because they're risking so much more. And the risk is what gives you the bravery later. And so like that is the absolute challenge, because people don't want to be disappointed. They don't want to be hurt. And they need to feel so safe to say things out loud and then to work in that sort of a way. And so, man, that's the job though, is to create these spaces, whether you're in sports or business or hospital or whatever it is, like to create the safety for bravery. And if you can do those things, then you got a real shot to do something pretty uncommon.
That's awesome. Well, I was going to ask you if you had anything that you wanted to leave the audience with. That was pretty impressive. But if you have anything additional, please, by all means.
No, I've just appreciated being on the podcast. This is great. Love to think through what it really takes all the time. It's so good for me and healthy for me to be able to like put things down. I always tell people like write stuff down and put them somewhere. And if you don't write, then say it out loud somewhere so that somebody can be annoyed at you when you don't live into what you told them what to do. And so this is a great opportunity. I appreciate you giving it to me to be able to, hold myself accountable with something that's hopefully real and genuine. And, and my players can be like, hey, listen to this podcast. You're bad at this. And that can be then I can get better. And then, we can move forward all together. So we're excited.
For sure. Yeah. And I like the way you package so much, and I'm not going to go back over it. But the one thing that I want to leave the audience with is, please, this week, create positive gossip. Make that your intentional decision to talk good about people that's going to spread and go to somebody else that's going to lift them up and lift your community up. And if there's anything, please do that this week. So, Coach, thank you for sharing that phrase with me, because that's going to live with me forever.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
No problem. Well, hang tight. And then everybody, this is Coach Jeff Huebner. Thanks for joining us on the Pathways to Greatness podcast. We hope that today's conversation inspired you to take steps towards your own greatness. Remember, every journey starts with a single step. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit. Actually, share it with 3 people that you might think it might benefit. Until next time, keep pursuing your passions and carving your own path to greatness. Take care.